I'm Frank Tomasello of the Institute's Griffith Foundation, and it's my pleasure to moderate this conversation, examining the impact of fraud on the insurance ecosystem and the important role of public policymakers in anti-fraud efforts. Joining me today are a panel of experts from both the academic and regulatory realms. It's a pleasure to welcome to our microphones Dr. Robert Hoyt, the Dudley L. Moore Jr. Chair and Professor of Risk Management and Insurance in the Terry College of Business at the University of Georgia. Dr. Hoyt teaches corporate risk management and enterprise risk management and served as the department head for the Insurance, Legal Studies, and Real Estate Department for some 23 years. His research interests are varied, and they include the topic of the economics of insurance fraud. To learn more about his distinguished background, we invite you to visit terry.uga.edu. Also with us is the Honorable Trinidad Navarro, Commissioner of the Delaware Department of Insurance. The Commissioner leads this state office, which is charged with protecting, educating, and advocating for the residents of Delaware. He's a lifelong Delawarean with an extensive public service record, having served in law enforcement as both a county police officer and a county sheriff. While a police officer, he received the department's Distinguished Medal of Valor. The commissioner is a member of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, where, among other things, he co-chairs the group's National Anti-Fraud Task Force. For additional biographical information, please visit insurance.delaware.gov. And last but not least, joining us today is Mr. Ben Ike, Manager of State Training and Development at the Levin Center for Oversight and Democracy with the Wayne State University School of Law in Detroit, Michigan. His primary responsibilities include helping to build the State Oversight Academy by developing quality programming for the state legislative audience and the public. And he does this through state legislative oversight workshops for a national audience. Short podcasts on specific oversight topics that he calls FAST classes are also offered, and state-specific content, including workshops at state capitals across the country, are part of the repertoire of the Levin Center. Mr. Ike helps equip legislators with the tools and best practices needed for bipartisan fact-finding and to empower legislators to see differences in perspective as an advantage when seeking facts together. His full bio appears at levincenter.org. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. In keeping with the mission of the Institute's Griffith Foundation, this conversation will be purely instructional in nature. It will not support a position on any issues. To begin our conversation, I'll call upon Dr. Hoyt to help us to better understand and appreciate the impact of fraud on the insurance ecosystem. Then I'll ask Commissioner Navarro to provide some insight into regulatory efforts to combat insurance fraud. And finally, I'll seek Mr. Ike's thoughts on how the legislative oversight function can be leveraged to bolster fraud prevention efforts. Importantly, this session will serve as an introduction to an important topic. Complementary, in-depth, state-specific programming exploring this topic is available. Both the Griffith Foundation and the Levin Center are eager to come together to provide such programming. Insurance plays a critical role in society, undergirding many aspects of our personal lives and professional endeavors, and insurance fraud adversely affects this important industry. Dr. Hoyt, can you help us to better appreciate the impact of fraud on the insurance ecosystem?
Absolutely, Frank, and my pleasure to be available to speak some on this very important topic. As I like to say, I study fraud, I don't do it, but this is a topic that I've had as part of my research agenda for a number of years. In my short time, I'm going to briefly talk about scale, a little bit about the scale that we see, impact, and then at least kick things off on what can be done. So those are the key points that I'm going to try to address in my short time. First of all, best estimates are that the overall cost of insurance fraud in the U.S. is over $300 billion annually. So we're talking about a big impact in that context. And this ultimately, as I'll share in some of my remarks, translates through to an impact that directly affects consumers. It's also estimated that this is the #2 white-collar crime in the United States. In a number of my presentations, I used to ask people, well, can you guess what #1 is? And #1 is tax fraud. For obvious reasons, I started feeling a little guilty when people's hands went up real fast, that they somehow knew what the #1 crime was, but that gives you a sense for scale. Also important, and we'll talk about this, is ranges in terms of who are the perpetrators, from individuals that are just opportunistic, one-off sorts of events, to situations where we actually have organized groups, crime, or gang rings that are participating in these activities. And as I've studied this topic over the years, one of the biggest challenges is battling the perception that insurance fraud is a victimless crime, or perhaps even worse, that people say, well, it's just the big insurers' problem, right? And so that's something that we'll certainly talk about. But the perception piece is certainly a challenge, but I think it is also an opportunity, and we'll be talking more about that. So let me switch to the impact piece. Obviously, those are big numbers, but what do we really see there? Well, I think most of us understand and appreciate how important insurance and the availability of insurance is to consumers and businesses alike. But a critical point is that for most of us and for most decision makers, it's not a discretionary purchase. We can't drive a car in most states, probably virtually all, and we can't drive a car if we don't have insurance and can't show proof of insurance. Businesses and individuals can't get financing, loans, and so forth without the existence of insurance. And we could go on, but the point is that it turns out that insurance, by and large, is almost a necessity in many cases. And economists like me like to describe that as saying that we'd expect demand for insurance to be highly inelastic from a price perspective. And why is that important in this conversation? Well, what that means is that changes in price don't drive a big decrease in the demand, and therefore, to a large extent, costs are going to get passed through to that end consumer. So fraud is a significant one of those costs faced on the insurance system, and those are going to translate through ultimately to that end consumer. Even worse, some of the most critical lines of insurance, such as workers' comp and health insurance and auto, also happen to be the lines of insurance that tend to be the most impacted by insurance fraud. So that leads to even more disruption in terms of potential availability and costs for these important types of insurance. So even if we perceived it as an insurer-only problem, insurers do have a lot of tools, including special investigation units. They have a lot of data, and they certainly are doing a lot to try to mitigate and prevent fraud. But at the end of the day, as I'll say a few more words about, this is really a problem that has to be addressed from multiple fronts. And not surprisingly, I'm going to argue that lawmakers have an important role to play there as well. Okay. I do also want to alert folks, as you orient to this space of insurance fraud, that sometimes we can believe that maybe it's all about the policyholders, claim fraud, in other words, claimants filing fictitious claims or exaggerating the amounts. But the reality is when you look under the hood in this space, this is an issue of both providers. So we have medical provider issues, we have contractors, we have body shops, agents, unfortunately, in some cases, and even businesses that are committing premium fraud, where they're basically not reporting correct information around employee numbers for workers' comp and things of that sort. So it isn't all about claim fraud alone. It really is a span across all of the different parties participating in the system. Okay. Now, the one thing that what may sound a little odd to folks is that economists like me will talk about efficient levels of things. And so there really is probably an efficient level of insurance fraud. Zero fraud is probably a nice and desirable, an enviable goal, but it's not probably a realistic one. That some level of fraud is likely to always be present. But ultimately, what we've been talking about in some of our work is the notion of excess fraud, and certainly at a level of $300 billion annually, I think we can quickly come to an agreement that the level is extreme. So let me move to my third piece briefly, and that is, so now that I've depressed everybody about how big the challenge is, what can be done, right? And fortunately, I have reinforcements coming soon to add to this theme in the commissioner and our colleague from the law school, Ben, will also weigh in, but I think there's a lot that can be done. So I'll offer my few comments here briefly to kind of initiate things in my portion. So, as I mentioned, this is an area of research that I've been focused on for some time. And throughout my my work, some of these elements have tended to emerge. So first of all, it really does require a village here. Really, all stakeholders have to be involved. Consumers and businesses, as I was alluding to before, don't always have a strong awareness of what the impact is and what it's impacting on them. So any additional efforts to build that awareness are certainly critical. Insurers obviously play a critical role, but that also needs to be coordinated, and it needs to be facilitated too in cases by regulators and by lawmakers, as I'll allude to. But as I noted, they have a number of tools and capabilities to be deployed here, but it has to be done within an integrated framework. Most important to our audience here is regulators and legislators, lawmakers, certainly have a role to play, and I'll mention briefly before I conclude some of what I've found in prior research, but their role in providing tools, enabling some of the efforts, and in some cases actually doing some of the work as well certainly becomes critical. And then lastly, but certainly very much related, is law enforcement and the legal system have to be engaged and a part of this collaborative effort as well. And as I mentioned, I've been studying the economics of insurance fraud for a long time. And years ago, we said, almost no state declared insurance fraud a crime. Well, the good news is we're up to, at least the best I can determine, 48 states that do classify insurance fraud as a crime, but in some cases maybe not as serious as maybe would be effective as a deterrent. So as you can see, there's a role for everyone to play, but clearly lawmakers have an important piece of this. Two final quick points for me. The economics of fraud is, as mentioned, something I've had a focus on. And I had a simple model years ago in a paper that basically said if you want to understand why people commit insurance fraud, you look at a simple equation. What's the probability of that they can be successful? How much can they get, right? So probability times successful or a payoff, right? Minus the probability that they'll be punished or deterred or detected times what the level of that punishment is. And the reality is, in many cases, both the probability and the magnitude of those punishments in the past have not been significant enough to really deter this sort of activity. So the last point for me in a paper that we did that gets us right to the lawmaker piece is that we looked at what sorts of laws could actually be beneficial in reducing fraud. And I'll just mention as examples here in this previous work that fraud penalties, meaning is it classified as a felony in your state or in your jurisdiction? Do you have mandatory SIU requirements? That was ultimately something that we found to be very important. Do we have mandatory reporting to the professional licensing bureaus or authorities within the state if we have bad actors engaged in insurance fraud? And then it's also worth thinking about kind of what the posture of the state is around aggressive bad faith laws, because ultimately those can sort of unwind the capabilities of insurers to ultimately pursue some of these matters. So I'll conclude, as I noted here, I think increased awareness and a concerted effort by all stakeholders is really critical to achieving some success here. It's a big problem. It needs a lot of people reacting in concerted ways to address this. And probably most critically for our audience here, lawmakers are critical in this effort, and you have a very important role to play. So thank you for your attention.
Dr. Hoyt, thank you. We appreciate you sharing your insight with us. Want to turn now to Delaware Insurance Commissioner Trinidad Navarro. Commissioner, we welcome your perspective on efforts underway within the regulatory community to combat insurance fraud. Can you provide some insight, perhaps, into both state-specific and NAIC efforts that are underway?
Sure. Thanks, Frank. And to Dr. Hoyt's original point that I think he said that, well, we investigate fraud and prosecute it, and I don't do it either. So it's one of his first comments. But it's great to be here. I'll say that the NAIC has a renewed emphasis on insurance fraud investigations and really the impact that it has on insurance premiums. Dr. Hoyt stole some of my thunder. It's about $308 billion that we found the amount of loss in the U.S. last year alone. You know, so it accumulates. You know, I mean, it resets every year. And if you put that in perspective, if you were able to take dollar bills and place them side by side, you could go to the moon and back 17 times to give you sort of a perspective about how big a problem it really is. So typically we think along lines of, you know, insurance fraud, we tend to focus on scams surrounding auto claims or staged accidents, prescription drugs, and Medicare fraud. But today, believe it or not, and one of the most prevalent frauds we see here in Delaware and across the country are cell phone scams, right? So if you go to the Apple store and purchase a new phone, and you're offered an insurance plan through a third party, which is typically out of Florida. We've seen that, you know, these types of insurance issues cover claims that are filed for lost or damaged phones. And so well, one of the things we found is that we're getting 30 to 40 referrals from the same phone number. So we've been working with our state prosecutors. You know, there's been multiple claims on this, and you know, it's something that's happening not just here in Delaware, but it's happening, you know, like I said, across the country. And again, to Dr. Hoyt's point, in Delaware, insurance fraud is a felony. And so people often don't think that, I mean, they know that they're not going to go rob a bank, right? Because they know it's, it's not a good chance you're going to get away with it, number one. And number two, it's something that people just, right-minded people don't do. But good people oftentimes will do bad things, and they think that, insurance fraud is a victimless crime. And quite frankly, we all pay thousands more for our insurance premiums every year because of insurance fraud. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we do within the NAIC. That's the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. As the chair of the Anti-Fraud Task Force, we've really been focusing on the exchange of information across the country. And I mentioned earlier about the staged crimes that we see, the low level scams. But one of the things that's most interesting is that it's not just a consumer issue. Recent fraud investigations into some of the larger P&C companies have found fraud on the carrier side, specifically recently along the Gulf Coast. We saw adjusters who would submit a report, and it was manipulated by the company after the report was submitted. And what we uncovered was multi-million-dollar scams involving hurricane damage claims. So it's not just the consumers. It happens on the carrier side as well. One of the largest scams we've seen within the last year or so is a company called Vestu. It's a $4 billion fraud involving an Israeli company. We've worked with our partners across the globe, and it really speaks to the importance of our international fraud relationships that we've cultivated over the past several years. So it's not just what you think about as somebody reporting a claim after they have an accident, right? Or they purchase insurance after they have an accident. It's really on a much larger scale. So back to the NAIC, we conduct monthly improper marketing of health insurance plans with an emphasis on lead generators. We've all seen those commercials where famous folks from our past lives perhaps are selling these Medicare Advantage plans, and they're offering things like rides to the doctor and dental and vision plans. Well, and they'll say that they can save you money in your Social Security check depending on your zip code. Well, the only way they can save you money is if you actually purchase a plan that's less expensive than what you already have. So, and the dental and vision, yeah, they can get all that for you, but you have to pay for it. And it's very misleading. So we really worked hard this last year with our friends across the country, our friends in Congress. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, who chairs a very important committee, worked on and with us to eliminate those commercials. You don't see them anymore, and it really has reduced the number of claims or reported fraud involving Medicare Advantage plans. So we're really, really proud of that. But when we look at improper marketing of health insurance plans, we just completed the work on what's called Model 880, which is the unfair trade practices initiative that we have within the NAIC. This is tough. When you have 56 regulators, it's one in every state in the 6 territories to agree on anything. It's really hard, but we were able to get that completed. So that's something else that we're really proud of. And just a few other things that through the Anti-Fraud Task Force, we have regular meetings, monthly meetings, meetings at our annual events, and we share information now. We used to put information and keep them almost in silos, right? So that the health insurance committee would have their part on these types of crimes I mentioned, or scams involving Medicare Advantage plans. But we also had the Anti-Fraud Task Force doing work, and then we also had the D Committee, which is the market conduct, doing investigations. And so we've tore down those silos. Now we're all working together, and I'll say it has had profound impact. We've worked with the FBI on multiple fraud cases involving skinny plans or health sharing ministries, and we also do have we don't have regulatory authority over those types of plans like the health sharing ministries, but when they're selling or marketing a product that they're saying it's not insurance, but it has all the aspects of insurance, we do get involved in these investigations. So one of the challenges with the health sharing ministries is that there's no real oversight. So we've worked with them to put together a project to have them accredited. And that works well for those who participate in the accreditation process. But let's face it, the bad eggs simply don't bother with that process. So two other things that we're doing right now at the NAIC, we have a Confluence page. It's accessible just for regulators. So on an ongoing basis, we put information into that page for bad actors that are doing things across the country, specifically recently related to health insurance fraud, but it goes through all types of fraud across the country. So, and we've recently created a portal that will be public facing, that people will be able to review agents and producers on this portal. And it's similar to a project called Broker Check, so that if you have a new agent or a new producer you don't know, you can look them up and you can see if they've had issues in the past, with either paying claims or any types of fraudulent issues as well. So we're real excited about where we're going now with the task force. We're concerned as regulators about the challenges with artificial intelligence. There's good things that we can do with it, such as determine or find cases that are more likely fraud. But then what can happen with companies when they're unfortunately discriminating against people, they'll say that a computer can't be biased, but that person who put together that program or that software or that artificial intelligence may be. And so that's one of our biggest challenges as regulators today.
Commissioner, we appreciate your comments and thank you for your service as well. I think we have an appreciation of the sophisticated anti-fraud efforts that are underway within the regulatory community. Very important work. During your discussion, you spoke briefly about the overlay between the regulatory and legislative community at one point. And we'd like to build upon that a bit by calling upon Ben Ike, who's here to help us consider how the legislative oversight function can be leveraged so that lawmakers can bolster the fraud prevention efforts that you've talked about. Ben, we're eager to learn more about that. Where would you like to begin that examination?
Thank you, Frank. And I feel a little nervous being the anchor on this relay. I mean, those were two excellent presentations, very informative. So again, my name is Ben Ike, and I'm from the State Oversight Academy, and my focus is on state legislative oversight. Delighted to be a part of this webinar today. So I'd like to start by talking about legislative oversight and the way we frame it. The authority of a legislature to go and get information on government programs and services has been, over a century of case law has been built to really reaffirm that authority of a legislature to go out and be the eyes and the voice of the people. Now, it's important to also make sure to say that an Oversight's not a prosecution. Oversight is a chance to be able to get information, to get it out in the open. And then from there, if there is information that prosecutors can use to pursue prosecution, so be it. But it is important to, detail that there are different authorities in play here and really different goals. But the two sides can, information can kind of flow from one to the other and can influence action on both sides. Maybe there's a prosecution that brings some interesting information to light that the legislature then wishes to pursue. I also want to make sure, it's a very common question asked, the difference between a legislative hearing and an oversight hearing, because a legislative hearing is usually revolving around of a bill. There's something to vote on at the end of it. There's some sort of, I'm in support, I'm in opposition, whereas a hearing on oversight is informative. So Trinidad Commissioner Navarro brought up earlier the implications of artificial intelligence. So you could have a hearing just on AI and the implications there. Being able to get that information on record and up into light as a way to continue to serve as those eyes and that voice. So we use here at the State Oversight Academy this graphic here to really explain how that eyes and voice of the people can really happen at every step along our cycle of accountability. So start with me over on the 12 o'clock position here, where you have some sort of a problem that comes up. This could be an insurance fraud. This could be, even just a broader, any issue that a state legislature may face. There's the oversight step. Do we do a hearing? Do we have a couple of interviews? Maybe there's a report that we can put out on the topic, getting all those facts together that then influence the bill. Bill gets passed, becomes law, goes to the regulatory community. There's steps in place for implementation, and we continue to go through this cycle of getting information and thinking through how we can be as efficient as we can with our different objectives. Now, this is how it works in our perfect world. But what we're seeing is this big red arrow that happens in state legislatures all across the country, where a problem will pop up and the oversight will be skipped. We'll rush to a bill. We want to show action. We want to show that we're responding and we're getting out there and making things happen. Well, there's an issue there. If you make this shortcut and you miss the oversight, one, when you introduce the bill, it limits your scope. So the problem might actually be elsewhere, but because you already have this bill and you're already looking at one spot, you might not be able to cover all sorts of other ground that you really need to also take a look and consider. It also limits your chance to be able to work together in a bipartisan perspective if you have the oversight and you team up with people that are of a different party, of a different walk of life, and you all work together to get facts and information. That's a chance to be able to result in a better bill that has a better chance to be able to have the desired outcome and implementation that we're seeking, which is just making things run better for better governance. So this is what we focus on here in the Oversight Academy, is ways to be able to avoid that red arrow. And the way we do that is by categorizing state legislative oversight into these 6 different avenues. So the first one here, analytic bureaucracies, is kind of a mouthful, but we're thinking about your state auditors. This could be your fiscal office. This could be policy office. This could even be, it could be insurance commissioner offices. Essentially, any office within state government that is producing facts and information the legislature can then use for monitoring different programs or for legislative decision making. Appropriations process is going to be using the budget, maybe through a budget hearing or requiring reporting to receive a budget for a department. Committees are ways to be able to work together to get information through holding a hearing, through getting information, things like reports. We have a committee out in New York, for example, that put out a pretty interesting report last year on the secondary ticket market and all the different ways there was, hidden fees and that sort of deal. And that report fed into a pretty interesting bill that they passed, really trying to crack down on that practice. Administrative rule review is a legislature's chance to be able to make sure that there's faithful adherence to the intent of the law. This can happen when rules are first introduced, or it could also happen as rules are happening. For example, in Colorado, there's an annual rule review bill, and all rules expire in Colorado at the end of May, unless they're spelled out in that bill as being allowed to continue. Advice and consent is going to be things like gubernatorial appointments for departments or for commissions. This could be emergency power oversight and also reorganization checks and balances for different departments. And then finally, we have monitoring contracts, which has grown in interest because of implementation becoming more and more of an area of interest in oversight all across the country with a lot of the infrastructure dollars that are flowing now to the states. So a lot of legislatures are thinking through how they can use their authority to monitor high risk or high dollar types of contracts to be able to make sure that we're getting everything we can for not only the taxpayer money, but also just the programs and the performance, making sure things are at an end user point happening the way they are intended. I just want to share briefly a couple of recommendations. So if you're watching this and you're like, okay, this is all great, give me something I can pick up and I can run, go with the Joint Resolution O from 2022 in Michigan. This was to create a constitutional joint oversight committee with balanced party members that would also send recommended audit topics to Michigan's Auditor General. We thought that's a really powerful idea. You have this bipartisan group saying, okay, we need more information on insurance fraud or on whatever topic it might be. That's a really good indicator to other people that are trying to inform the legislature on what to prioritize. Another thing in the oversight community that's been talked about more and more is this whole shift to go towards more of an end user perspective, thinking through, okay, Was the road actually built? Or are people actually receiving unemployment insurance? Like getting to the actual end users of government programs and services to make sure that things are happening as intended, as opposed to compliance. More of like, you know, the paperwork go from A to B, or did the department spend all the money that we gave them? Like going a little bit deeper than that to really get the information and know at the heart of the matter, are we really making this positive impact that we're seeking to do? And then also, I just wanted to touch briefly on civility. And you have such a unique opportunity in a state legislature. You have this diverse group of people from all across your state that are together to solve problems. And you have a chance to be able to learn from them and work together and get the information on things that are complicated, things that are difficult, like insurance fraud, what we've been talking about here today. See this as an opportunity to be able to work with those sorts of people, but then also work with the agencies and really understand that these are complicated issues. They're difficult to tackle, and very rarely are we dealing with like some, you know, evil bureaucrat somewhere that's messing everything up. It just doesn't really happen that way very often. Usually what's happening is that these are just difficult issues and they need transparency and need information, and we can make things run better together. That's really what we see time and time again here at the Oversight Academy all across the country. Now, this slide is a little intimidating at first, but we can walk through it. We had a lot of great topics that were brought up in the previous presentations, and this is a way to be able to think about it as a legislator. If you care about these types of issues and you really want to use your oversight powers to get information, here's a way you can frame it out. Walk with me through the example. In the first column, I chose a topic. I chose fraud detection technology. Commissioner Navarro talked about this a little bit previous in his presentation. So topic is a good start, but you really want to just kind of focus in a little bit more, because if you go big with an oversight inquiry, it's really difficult to be able to, you know, kind of have a rally all around fraud detection technology. You got to go a little bit more in. So the one I chose, the subtopic inside of it, is improper marketing. Then when you make your factual question based on that subtopic, think about it as you want an answer in statistics, you want a numerical like information on how they're going through it by the numbers, but also you want a procedural, a process-oriented answer from the agency on step-by-step how they go about doing sort of things. So the question I have here is, how does my state identify false advertising in the insurance industry? And once discovered, how does enforcement work? That's a question that can guide your inquiry within your committee, within your caucus, within your entire legislature, or whatever the scope it might be. That is how you kind of get the information and use that as a guide, and the agency can receive that and know which way the legislature is trying to go. And then thinking through those avenues I discussed 2 slides previous, where you can think through, okay, I can get this, you know, maybe information from the auditor. I can talk to my insurance commissioner. Maybe I can find some partner at the university that I can call. I can call Dr. Hoyt over at UGA. He might have some information for me. All those sorts of steps to be able to get the information you're seeking. And when you're going through this, I also want to encourage, as you consider topics and subtopics, don't try to pursue the hot issue or the thing that's really kind of covering a lot of attention at the moment. Think about those lingering issues. Think about those problems that have been plaguing the state for years that just continue year after year after year and haven't gotten better. Think about those sorts of topics as really good places for good oversight to be able to commence that could result in some positive results for your state. And then lastly, I just want to say thank you again. And as you go through, hey, I mean, feel free to send me any of your plans. I'm happy to read over them. I might even provide you some feedback. Benjamin.Ike@wayne.edu. Thanks again. And at this point, I will turn it back over to Frank.
Ben, thank you for the introductory discussion of the legislative oversight function, an important function, and clearly an opportunity to help bolster fraud prevention efforts, which we've talked about here for the last 30 minutes or so. Our introductory discussion has come to a close. As mentioned during my opening remarks, complimentary in-depth state-specific programming exploring this topic is available. Public policymakers interested in state-specific offerings may reach out to us here at info@griffithfoundation.org, or they may contact the folks at the Levin Center at wayne.edu, and we would be pleased to learn more about your needs. Our organizations are eager to collaborate to help to meet those needs. Many thanks to our panelists, Dr. Robert Hoyt of UGA, Commissioner Trinidad Navarro of the Delaware Department of Insurance, and Mr. Ben Ike of the Levin Center. Thank you for sharing your insight and expertise with us. And a special thanks to you, our attendees, for your attention to the program. Until next time, I'm Frank Tomasello of the Institute's Griffith Foundation, inviting you to make your colleagues aware of this on-demand program, which will remain available on the Griffith Foundation website through the close of this year. Thank you.